My name is Diana Whitmore. I am 58 years old, a retired school teacher, and a widow who once believed that every sacrifice I made was for the good of my only son. I thought the years of stretching every paycheck, the nights of lesson plans by candlelight after grading papers, and the way I put my own dreams on hold would be enough to build him a future filled with security and love. But on the night he looked me in the eye and told me, "Don't ever come back," I realized just how fragile a mother's devotion can be when crushed under the weight of betrayal. I had given Ethan everything I had, even the house he called his own. I poured my retirement into its walls, believing it would be his refuge long after I was gone. Instead, it became the stage where my dignity was stripped away. He told me to leave, to walk out with nothing but the clothes on my back, and so I did. I stepped into the night, carrying only a small bag and the echo of his words pounding in my chest. My hands trembled as I texted back, "I won't." That was all I had left to say, but what Ethan didn't know was that silence can carry its own kind of power. Hours earlier, I had already walked into the bank and canceled the mortgage payments he depended on me to cover. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make a scene. I just signed the forms, thanked the teller, and walked out as if a great weight had been lifted. The next morning, before the sun rose, my phone lit up like a firestorm. 29 missed calls stacked one on top of the other. Ethan, Clara, numbers I didn't recognize. They all wanted something from me, but for the first time in decades, I didn't feel the urge to answer. I let the phone vibrate and fall silent in my hand, and in that silence, I discovered something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. The night before, I had stood on the front porch clutching the railing while Ethan shoved my suitcase out onto the lawn. Clara stood in the doorway with her arms folded, her face cold, almost satisfied. My neighbors must have heard the shouting, but only one light flicked on across the street. My son's voice cracked through the air. "Don't ever come back." And then the door slammed, locking me out of the life I had built for him. For a moment, I just stared at the house, the curtains drawn, the walls holding memories that now no longer belonged to me. It was the same house where I had taught him how to read, where we had celebrated his birthdays with store-bought cakes because money was always short. The same house where he had once run to me after nightmares, clinging to my robe until dawn. To be exiled from that place by his hand was more painful than any wound. But pain can be a teacher, and I was done being the student of disappointment. Standing there, clutching my phone, I knew I had a choice. I could crumble and beg for mercy, or I could rise quietly and let my actions speak for me. The house wasn't truly his. The bank records, the mortgage, the paperwork, it all carried my name. He had forgotten that. Or perhaps he thought I was too weak to use it. But I remembered my husband's voice in an old letter tucked away in my dresser. "Never give away your dignity, Diana." Not to anyone that night. I held on to those words more tightly than the keys he had ripped from me. So when Ethan's 29th call finally went unanswered, I smiled through the tears. It wasn't the smile of revenge. It was the smile of a woman who had finally learned that silence can be louder than shouting, that walking away doesn't always mean defeat, and that sometimes the most powerful answer a mother can give is no answer at all. And here I am, telling you my story. It is not an easy one, nor is it pretty, but it is mine. And if you've ever known what it feels like to be cast aside by someone you love most, you might understand the weight I carried into that night and the strength I found in its aftermath. Before I go on, let me pause here and say something to you. Stories like mine are more common than we admit, yet each one carries its own heartbeat, its own lesson. If what you've heard so far touches a chord in you, stay with me. Subscribe if you want to walk alongside stories of resilience, of mothers and fathers, grandparents and children finding their strength in silence. And share this with someone who might need to hear that losing everything doesn't mean you've lost yourself. Sometimes it means you're just beginning again, because that's what I learned. The strongest revenge is not loud. It's not cruel. It's steady, quiet, and unshakable. And my journey was only beginning the night I walked away from my own son's door. I was not born into comfort or ease. My earliest memories are of a drafty apartment on the south side of town where the sound of pipes rattling in the winter was louder than the hum of any lullaby. My parents worked hard, my father on construction sites and my mother cleaning houses. But no matter how many hours they labored, money seemed to slip through their fingers like sand. I learned early to stretch $1, to make a meal from scraps, and to sew my own dresses for school. That life taught me endurance, but it also taught me longing, the constant ache to give my child what I never had. When I became a teacher, I didn't see it as just a job. It was a calling, a chance to pour into the lives of children who might not have anyone else believing in them. I stayed late after class, helping kids sound out words, writing notes of encouragement in the margins of their essays. The paycheck was modest, but the reward came in the light of their eyes when they finally understood something. Still, no matter how fulfilling my work was, I always came home to the reality that bills piled high and the roof leaked every spring. My husband, Michael, carried his own weight, patching roofs, taking extra shifts when he could. And yet when cancer came for him, all the strength and shifts in the world could not stop it. He was gone before Ethan turned 12, leaving me with a boy who needed more than I knew how to give. I poured myself into Ethan the way my students had once needed me. I packed lunches with little notes folded inside, stayed up sewing Halloween costumes when he was too shy to ask. On his 13th birthday, when I couldn't afford a party, I baked 2 small cakes from scratch and invited his closest friends. I wanted him to feel celebrated, even if I couldn't give him the things other kids took for granted. Ethan's smile that day was enough to fuel me for weeks. I told myself that if I kept giving, one day he would understand. One day he would appreciate the sacrifices. By the time Ethan went to college, I had worked extra tutoring hours to cover the tuition gap. I never bought myself new clothes, never took vacations. Every spare dollar went into his books, his rent, his meals. I remember sitting alone at the kitchen table late at night, bills spread across the wood, and whispering to Michael's photograph, "We're going to get him through this. He'll have the life we never had." It felt like a promise I was making, not just to my husband, but to myself. And then came Clara. She was striking the first time she walked through my door, with polished nails, a quick smile, and eyes that studied every corner of my modest house. I wanted to believe she loved Ethan for who he was, not for what he could become. I tried to welcome her, setting out coffee and pie, asking about her family. She spoke proudly of her father, a respected lawyer, and her mother, who hosted elegant dinners. I felt the gap between us immediately, though I pushed it aside. For Ethan's sake, I told myself I could learn to embrace her. When Sophie was born, I thought maybe everything would change. Holding that tiny girl in my arms, smelling the sweet milk on her breath, I felt hope swell inside me again. Sophie would curl her fingers around mine and gaze up at me with eyes so much like Michael's that I had to turn away to hide my tears. She grew fast, her laughter echoing through the halls, her footsteps light as she chased after her younger brother, Ben. Those 2 children became the light of my later years. They would run to me when I visited, shouting, "Grandma," as if no one else in the world mattered. They didn't see the lines on my face or the weariness in my body. They only saw love, and they gave it back without condition. I clung to those moments because slowly I began to see a change in Ethan. The boy who once clung to me in thunderstorms now had a hardened edge. He carried himself with a weight I didn't recognize, his eyes always shifting toward Clara as if seeking her approval before speaking. He spoke of money constantly, of opportunities missed, of how we should be living better. I listened, trying to soothe his frustration, reminding him that life was more than possessions. But it was as though my words bounced off stone. Clara's influence was growing stronger, shaping the man my son was becoming, and I found myself standing at a distance, watching him slip further away from me. Still, I kept showing up. I kept bringing groceries when I knew their pantry was thin, buying new shoes for Sophie when hers grew tight, sewing patches into Ben's jeans so they could last another season. I believed, maybe foolishly, that consistency would matter more than wealth, that love would speak louder than ambition. Yet somewhere deep inside, a whisper of unease began to grow. It was the quiet sense that the sacrifices of a lifetime might never be enough for a son who had learned to measure worth in dollars and deeds of ownership rather than in the steady hands of the mother who raised him. Looking back, I see that I was already on the edge of a storm I could not avoid. But at the time, I clung to what I had always known. Give more, endure more, and surely love would find its way back. I had no idea how soon that belief would be tested, or how far Ethan and Clara would go to take what they thought was theirs. I remember the storm the year after Michael died, the kind that flattened the sky and turned our little street into a narrow river of black glass. The wind pried at the window frames, and the roof rose and fell like the back of a frightened animal. I set bowls beneath the leaks and warmed a pot of soup stretched thin with water and a handful of noodles. Ethan was 8, small for his age, with scuffed knees and hair that never stayed down no matter how I smoothed it. He kept glancing at the windows as if the glass could learn to breathe. When thunder cracked like an iron door slamming in the heavens, he startled and pressed his shoulder to my side. "Mom," he whispered, "don't leave me." I lit a candle, even though the lights were still on. A small circle of fire can turn a room into a harbor. We pulled the old quilt from the couch and made a tent between 2 chairs, the way Michael used to do when the power failed and we needed a kingdom of our own. Inside, the world shrank to the soft weight of the blanket and the clean cotton smell that always clung to it. I read aloud from the library book we had renewed twice, the one about a boy who sails by starlight and learns to steer by listening to the ocean. Ethan rested his head on my shoulder, the patient weight of a child who trusts the person beside him will not move. When the windows shivered again, he didn't flinch as much. He counted under his breath with me, a nervous rhythm keeping time against the noise. I told him I was there. I told him storms pass, that even the loudest ones run out of breath. I told him how, when I was a girl, my father counted between lightning and thunder to measure how near the danger was, and how once the numbers grew, we knew the worst had moved on. We practiced together, eyes on the candle's steady flame. 5, 8, 10. The numbers. Push the fear back a little. The soup cooled, the house creaked. Somewhere a shutter learned to rattle. The roof held. His questions came the way rain does, softly and then all at once. Would we be okay without Dad? Would the roof fall in? Did grown-ups get scared? I answered each carefully because truth is a kind of shelter, too. I said I missed Michael every day, that roofs can be patched, and that sometimes grown-ups are afraid. But courage is fear that has learned to stand up. His hand found mine in the dark, small and certain. He believed me. In that belief, I felt like a lighthouse I hadn't known I could be, fixed and bright above water I could not control. When the lights finally went out, we stayed in our quilted cave and listened to the rain drum its 1,000 fingers on the shingles. I told him stories from my classroom, how the smallest victories mattered. A boy who learned the letter B by tracing it with his finger, a girl who discovered the word because could open a sentence like a door. He said those stories made the world sound fixable. I kissed his forehead and told him most things are, with time and attention and a little stubborn love. He fell asleep with his breath warm against my arm. I watched him the way mothers do, counting his inhales, smoothing his hair, promising a future he could climb without slipping. Outside, the storm shouldered on. I could almost feel Michael in the room, not as a ghost, but as a memory leaning its weight against the rafters with me. When dawn came thin and gray, the power hummed back. I made pancakes from the last scoop of mix because mornings after hard nights deserve a small sweetness. Ethan ate slowly, syrup shining at the corners of his mouth, looking up after each forkful as if to be sure the room was still holding together. Later, with the gutters overflowing and the yard a shallow lake, he drew a picture of a boat in a storm, a stick figure at the wheel, another curled safe below deck. He taped it to the fridge with careful hands. Every time I packed his lunch after that, I glanced at the little boat and breathed easier. The paper yellowed at the corners, but I left it there, a small flag of what we had survived. Time did what time always does. The boy who once pressed himself against my side learned to square his shoulders and look beyond me. Rainstorms stopped scaring him. Different weather came, expectations, pride, the kind of hunger that wears good shoes and speaks in confident sentences. New voices began crowding our quiet rooms. Brochures with glossy photographs appeared on the table, each one promising a staircase to a better life. I wanted that staircase for him, so I worked late, tutored more, and told him he could climb it 2 steps at a time. When he came home with grades he was proud of, I clapped as if applause could hold a young man steady. Sometimes, though, late at night, I would find the old quilt folded on the back of the couch and run my fingers over its worn stitches. I would remember that candle circle and the way his whisper anchored the room. "Mom, don't leave me." I hadn't. I built rooms inside rooms to keep him from feeling the cold. I bought the house I could not afford outright because I believed in shelter more than savings. I taught until my voice frayed. I told myself the boy who asked me to stay would grow into a man who knew how to stay for others, too. What I did not understand then was how quickly safety can be mistaken for ownership, and how easily comfort, repeated enough, begins to sound like a right. The boat drawing curled beneath newer magnets, game schedules, appointment cards, a flyer for a networking event. He grew taller than his teachers, taller than me, and with each inch, he seemed a little farther away. He learned a new language, one made of numbers and deeds and signatures, and I told myself that was adulthood arriving, its pockets full of keys. Memory is generous, but it is honest. It gives me the sweetness first, soup steam fogging his glasses, the slow counting because he wanted the storm to be farther away, the half-moon print of his ear pressed against my sweater. Then it gives me the ache. The same hands that once clung to mine would one day nudge me toward the door. The same voice that begged me not to go would tell me, flat and final, not to come back. When it rains now, I still light a candle. I still count. 5, 8, 10. I remember the boy who asked me to stay and the woman who promised she would. I remember that boats can ride storms, and that sometimes the wheel you teach a child to hold is the same one he will use to steer away. It was a Thursday afternoon when my phone rang, the kind of day where the sky hung low and the air smelled faintly of rain. I was folding laundry, the ordinary rhythm of shirts and towels stacked into neat piles, when I saw Ethan's name flash across the screen. My heart gave a little leap, the kind that never really leaves you no matter how grown your child becomes. I pressed answer, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear, hoping to hear something warm in his voice. Instead, his tone was clipped, hurried, almost rehearsed. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." Those 4 words sank into me heavier than they should have. I tried to catch a glimpse of his face in my mind, the way he looked when he was younger, the crooked smile that used to soften every syllable. But this voice was different. It carried weight, an edge sharp enough to cut. I asked if everything was all right, if the kids were okay, if Clara was well. He paused a beat too long before saying, "Just come by the house tonight." 7 o'clock. No explanation, no comfort, only an invitation wrapped in steel. My hand slowed over the laundry, the folded towels slipping to the side as unease spread through me. Yet in that same moment, a flicker of hope rose. Maybe he wanted to make peace. Maybe he had been thinking about the way things had gone, the arguments, the distance that had grown like ivy across our relationship. Perhaps tonight he wanted to start pulling it back. I told him I would come. He hung up quickly without the familiar "love you" that used to close our calls. I stood there with the phone still warm in my hand, listening to the silence left behind. A mother's heart will cling to hope long after reason warns against it, and mine was no different. I imagined us sitting at the kitchen table where so many birthdays had been celebrated, where Michael's laughter had once filled the room. I thought of Ethan telling me he finally understood how much I had done for him. I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe he wanted to repair what was broken. The hours between that call and 7 o'clock stretched like thin glass. I tried to distract myself, polishing silverware I hadn't used in years, straightening the bookshelf, though no one but me ever noticed its disarray. Every tick of the clock felt louder, every shadow creeping across the floor sharper. My hands fumbled more than once, nerves making the simplest tasks feel heavy. I changed my blouse twice, wanting to look neat but not formal, approachable but not desperate. When I finally settled on a simple blue sweater, the same one Sophie once told me matched the color of the sky in her crayon box, I tried to breathe easier. On the drive over, I passed the corner store where Ethan used to beg for candy, the park where he had learned to ride his bike, the library where we spent Saturday mornings wandering the aisles. Each landmark pressed on me like a reminder of the years stitched into our shared life. By the time I turned onto his street, my chest was tight with the mix of memory and anticipation. I parked in front of the house, staring up at the windows that glowed faintly in the early evening light. The curtains were drawn, but I imagined my grandchildren inside, their laughter spilling across the walls. That thought steadied me. Before getting out of the car, I whispered a quiet prayer, asking for patience, for clarity, for the right words if he was finally ready to hear them. I wanted to believe this meeting was about reconciliation. Even the sternness in his voice on the phone could be explained by stress, by bills, by the pressures of adulthood. I told myself he was still the boy who once whispered, "Don't leave me," in the dark, even if he had buried that part of himself beneath layers of pride. As I walked up the path, the porch light flickered on. I hesitated at the steps, smoothing the front of my sweater, clutching my purse a little too tightly. My pulse hammered, but I lifted my chin. For all my fear, for all my doubt, I carried with me a reservoir of hope that perhaps tonight he would see me not as an obstacle, not as a burden, but as the mother who had carried him through storms. The door opened before I could knock, and in the frame stood not just Ethan, but the weight of something I could not yet name. His expression was unreadable, caught somewhere between impatience and determination. He stepped aside and motioned me in. "Thanks for coming," he said flatly. I nodded, stepping into the house that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something simmering on the stove. The air was thick, charged with a tension I couldn't quite place. My eyes darted toward the hallway, hoping for a glimpse of Sophie or Ben, but the house was strangely quiet. I felt a shiver despite the warmth of the room. Still, I kept telling myself this could be the night we finally bridged the distance. I didn't yet know how wrong I was. The moment I stepped fully into the living room, I realized this wasn't just a conversation between a mother and her son. The room was arranged with a purpose that made my stomach tighten. Clara sat straight-backed on the sofa, her legs crossed neatly, her manicured fingers drumming lightly on her knee as though she had been rehearsing her patience. Beside her sat Nathan, her father, a man with silver hair and sharp eyes that scanned me like a ledger in need of balancing. Alice, her mother, occupied the armchair, her posture less rigid but her silence heavy. The air felt staged, like they had been waiting for me, like I was the final piece of a puzzle already laid out on the table. Ethan closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit. I hesitated, feeling as if the walls had drawn closer, the family portraits on the mantel now watching me as silent witnesses. I chose the edge of the sofa, opposite Clara, trying to anchor myself in the familiarity of the space. But it no longer felt like my son's home. It felt like a courtroom, and I had been summoned without warning. Clara's smile was polite, almost brittle. "Diana," she said smoothly, "thank you for coming tonight. We've been meaning to have this discussion for some time." Her voice carried the weight of ownership, as though this were her home, her stage, and I was merely a guest expected to play my part. I turned to Ethan, searching his face for reassurance, for some sign that this wasn't as calculated as it appeared, but he avoided my eyes, his jaw clenched, his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked younger in that moment, not stronger but trapped, like someone following lines written by another. Nathan cleared his throat, leaning forward, his tone practiced. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began formally, though we had met before, "this house has become central to the well-being of Ethan and Clara's family. It represents stability for Sophie and Ben, but as things stand, the deed complicates matters. We think it's time to settle everything properly." My breath caught. I had been bracing for a difficult talk, maybe about money, maybe about boundaries, but his words pointed in a direction I had not wanted to imagine. Clara leaned in, her voice softer now, almost coaxing. "It's not about taking anything from you. It's about making sure the children have security. You've done so much already, Diana. This would just make things easier for everyone. Everyone." The word clanged in my ears, leaving me out of its circle. I folded my hands in my lap, willing them to stay steady. "The children are secure," I said quietly. "I've kept up with the mortgage. There is a roof over their heads." Ethan finally spoke, his tone sharper than I expected. "But it's not really ours, Mom. We can't plan the future when we don't even have control over where we live. Clara and I need to make decisions without limitations." His pause on that last word cut me deeper than if he had raised his voice. To him, I wasn't a mother who had given her life to him. I was a limitation. Alice shifted in her chair, her eyes flicking between me and Clara. She looked less certain, but she said nothing. Nathan, however, pressed forward. "You see, Diana, this is the natural step. You're retired, you've done your part. Transferring the deed now ensures no confusion later, and frankly, it prevents any unpleasant legal entanglements down the line." Unpleasant legal entanglements. His words were wrapped in politeness but carried the shadow of threat. Clara reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it lightly, a signal of solidarity. "Think of Sophie and Ben," she said gently. "They deserve the peace of mind that comes with knowing this home is truly theirs." The children's names, spoken like currency, pressed hard against my heart. For a fleeting moment, I pictured their faces, Sophie with her crooked pigtails and Ben with his toothless grin. My love for them was immeasurable. And yet I knew, deep in my chest, that love was being weaponized against me. I sat there, surrounded on all sides, my pulse loud in my ears. I thought of the years I had spent patching roofs, of the meals stretched thin so Ethan could eat more, of the classroom nights when I marked essays with tired eyes, only to use that paycheck for his tuition. Every sacrifice had led to this room, this tribunal, this cold choreography. My life's work, translated into property papers they wanted me to surrender. Ethan's eyes finally met mine, but they were hard, expectant. "Mom," he said, "we just need you to do the right thing." The right thing. To him, the phrase meant signing away the very ground beneath my feet. To me, it meant holding firm to the dignity I had left. I drew a breath, steadying myself. "I came here tonight hoping for a conversation with my son," I said slowly, "not an interrogation by a committee." My voice trembled at first, but it grew steadier with each word. Clara's smile faltered, Nathan leaned back, and even Alice lowered her gaze. The silence that followed was thick, but I sat in it, holding my ground. Ethan broke the silence first, his voice rising with impatience, as though the veneer of courtesy had worn too thin. He stepped closer, pulling a folder from the coffee table and sliding it toward me. "It's simple, Mom. Just sign the papers. Once your name is off the deed, everything becomes easier for everyone. We won't have to keep going in circles about ownership." His words landed heavy, but it was the way he said, "your name," that pierced me, as if it were some relic standing in the way of his future. I looked down at the folder, the crisp papers tucked inside. Legal documents neatly prepared, every line designed to strip away what little ground I had left. My hands hovered over the folder, but I didn't touch it. My pulse drummed at my temples. "Ethan," I said softly, "this house is my life's work. It's the roof your father and I dreamed of, the place I poured every penny into when we had nothing else. You're asking me to give up more than a signature. You're asking me to erase myself." Clara leaned forward, her voice calm but edged with persuasion. "No one is erasing you, Diana. You'll always be welcome here, but the deed should reflect reality. This is their family home now. Think of Sophie and Ben. You don't want them to grow up feeling uncertain about where they belong." She tilted her head, her eyes fixed on me as though I were a stubborn student in need of coaxing. I turned toward Ethan, searching for the boy I once knew, the child who clung to me in storms, the teenager whose laughter once filled these rooms. But what I found was a man hardened by ambition, his jaw tight, his eyes unyielding. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why is the house not enough as it is? Why do you need my name gone?" His answer was swift, almost rehearsed. "Because we can't build a future if you're holding on to the past. Clara and I need to refinance, make improvements, secure loans. As long as you're on the deed, we're tied down. You've had your life, Mom. Let us have ours." The words sliced clean. "You've had your life." As if mine were already over, as if every year I had left was nothing but an afterthought. My throat burned, but I steadied my voice. "I'm not standing in your way. I've only ever wanted you to be happy, but happiness built on taking from others doesn't last. This house is not a chain around your neck. It's a gift." One you seem to have forgotten, Nathan finally spoke, his voice polished and cool. "Diana, no one is disputing what you've done, but legally the cleanest solution is to transfer ownership now. It protects everyone involved and avoids complications later." His emphasis on complications hung in the air like a veiled warning. Alice shifted uneasily, her eyes flicking to me, then away. I caught something in her expression, hesitation, perhaps even guilt, but she remained silent, bound by the momentum of her family. Clara pressed further, her tone sharpening. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. If you really cared about Ethan and the children, you'd sign. This isn't about you anymore. It's about them." The words struck like a hammer, each syllable pounding against my chest. I thought of Sophie's small arms wrapping around me, of Ben's laughter when I pushed him on the swing. I thought of the nights I sat awake, balancing bills so Ethan could go to college, of the mornings I walked into classrooms with a smile even when my own world felt like it was crumbling. Every sacrifice had been for them, for him, and now they stood before me, demanding more, as if love owed them property. Ethan's eyes blazed with frustration. "Just sign it, Mom. Stop making this dramatic. Clara's right. It's for the kids. Don't you want them to feel secure?" He pushed the pen across the table, the silver tip glinting beneath the lamp. I looked at the pen, then at him. My heart ached, but my spine straightened. What I want, I said slowly, is for my grandchildren to learn the value of love and respect. Not entitlement, not force. The room fell quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Nathan leaned back, steepling his fingers. Ethan's chest rose and fell, his impatience vibrating like a taut string. I stood, leaving the papers untouched on the table. My voice trembled but held. I will not sign away the last piece of myself I have left. If you think family means forcing me to surrender my dignity, then you've forgotten what family is. Ethan's face hardened, a shadow crossing his eyes. Then don't expect to stay here, he said flatly. His words echoed through the room like a door slamming shut, though no door had moved. I felt the weight of his ultimatum pressing down, but I didn't bend. My chest was tight, my palms damp, but inside me, something steadier stirred, something older than fear. I gathered my purse and walked toward the hallway, each step heavy with the realization that the boy I once protected was gone, replaced by a man who valued paper over love. As I reached the door, I turned back once, my eyes sweeping across their faces. The cold certainty of Clara, the rigid calculation of Nathan, the silent discomfort of Alice, and the hardened glare of my son. I gave you everything I had, I whispered, but this I will not give. And with that, I stepped out into the night, the sound of my own heartbeat louder than the closing of the door behind me. I had almost reached the door when Ethan's footsteps came quickly behind me, his shadow stretching long across the hallway. Before I could turn the knob, his hand clamped down on my arm. His grip was firm, harder than it needed to be, and for a fleeting moment I couldn't recognize the boy I had raised in the man who stood before me. His face was set, jaw tight, eyes blazing with something between anger and desperation. "You're not listening," he snapped. "If you won't sign, then you don't belong here anymore." My heart pounded so fiercely I could hear it in my ears. "Ethan, let go," I managed, trying to keep my voice calm, but he shoved me backward instead. My shoulder struck the wall, pain shooting down my side. Clara appeared in the hallway then, arms folded, her expression cold, approving. "She made her choice," she said, her voice like glass breaking. Ethan stormed past me, yanked my suitcase from the corner where I had set it down earlier, and flung it through the open door. It tumbled across the porch and landed in the yard with a heavy thud, clothes spilling out onto the damp grass. I stared at the scattered pieces of my life, shirts I had ironed, the framed photograph of Michael that had slipped loose from the side pocket, lying face down in the dirt. My breath caught in my throat. "You can't stay here, Mom," Ethan said, his voice lower now, but no softer. "Don't make this harder than it already is." His words carved into me, as if I were the intruder, not the woman who had built this home brick by brick with her sacrifices. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stand tall, clutching my purse as though it could hold me upright. From across the street, I heard a door creak open. Mr. Donovan, my neighbor of 20 years, had stepped onto his porch. He stood silently in the shadows, watching, his phone glinting faintly in his hand. I knew then he had seen everything, and part of me felt both exposed and strangely protected. I turned back to Ethan, searching his face for even the smallest flicker of hesitation. The boy who once whispered not to leave him alone. But there was nothing, only hardness and resolve. "If that's what you want," I said quietly, my voice trembling but clear, "then I will go." I stepped out into the night air, cool and damp, smelling faintly of rain. Behind me, the door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the street. The sound seemed to travel into my chest, sealing something off inside me. I bent to gather my things, my fingers brushing over the photo of Michael, now smudged with dirt. I wiped it gently on my sleeve, my tears blurring his smile. My phone buzzed in my hand. A new message from Ethan lit the screen. "Don't ever come back." The words glowed cold and sharp, burning themselves into me. My throat ached as I typed back 2 words: "I won't." My hands shook, but I hit send. Behind me, I thought I heard Clara's muffled laugh through the closed door. I pressed the photo of Michael against my chest and whispered, "I'm trying," as though he might still hear me. The street was nearly empty, save for the warm light spilling from Donovan's porch. He didn't cross the street, didn't intrude, but he stood there like a silent witness, his gaze steady, offering a presence that reminded me I wasn't invisible. For the first time that night, I let my shoulders fall, the weight of years pressing down. I gathered my clothes back into the suitcase as best I could, folding them clumsily, not caring about neatness. Each garment felt heavier than cloth should, as if it carried the burden of what had just been severed. I pulled the suitcase upright, its wheel catching on the crack in the pavement, and began to walk down the path. Each step echoed with the truth. The home I had built was no longer mine, not in their eyes, not in their hearts. But even as my tears blurred the night, a small, defiant ember glowed inside me. They thought pushing me out meant victory. They thought locking that door was the end of my story. What they didn't know was that silence has a way of speaking, and dignity has a way of surviving even the harshest exile. I walked away slowly, each breath steadier than the last, my grip tightening on the handle of my suitcase. By the time I reached the corner, I looked back once more. The house stood dark and still, indifferent to the storm it had just witnessed. My son was inside, surrounded by walls I had paid for, furniture I had chosen, memories I had given. But I was outside, and though the night air cut cold against my skin, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, an awakening. That night, I found myself in a small roadside motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and rooms that smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. The clerk barely looked at me when I slid a few crumpled bills across the counter. My suitcase wobbled behind me, the wheel squeaking, and when I pushed open the door to the room, the stale air pressed against me like a weight. I dropped the bag in the corner and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the brown carpet patterned with stains that told stories no one cared to hear. My body ached from Ethan's shove, a bruise spreading across my shoulder like a shadow blooming. But the ache inside me was sharper, deeper, a hollow space that once held trust. I looked down at my phone, the glow lighting the dim room. His message was still there. "Don't ever come back." My reply, 2 simple words, sat beneath it. "I won't." The finality of it stung, but I read it again and again, almost daring myself to believe it. My thumb hovered over the screen as if I might erase it, take it back, but I didn't. I set the phone down on the nightstand and picked up the framed photograph of Michael I had rescued from the grass. His smile looked tired in that picture, but it had always been full of quiet strength. I whispered into the silence, "What would you say to me now?" The room offered nothing but the hum of the old air conditioner. I pulled open my purse and found the letter he had left me all those years ago, the one I had read so many times the folds were soft as cloth. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the lines with trembling hands. His words reached across the years. "Don't give away your dignity, Diana. Not to anyone, not for comfort, not for peace, not even for love. Hold it the way you hold our son, tight, steady, unyielding." I closed my eyes, hearing his voice in the rhythm of those sentences, and for the first time that night, my breath slowed. I touched the bruise on my shoulder, feeling the tender swell beneath my skin, and I realized how far I had bent over the years, how much I had surrendered piece by piece in the name of motherhood. Every extra shift, every dollar poured into tuition, every hour spent mending the holes in Ethan's life, I had given it freely. But what he asked now, what Clara orchestrated through him, was no longer giving. It was taking, and I was done being taken from. I walked to the bathroom sink, turned on the faucet, and splashed cold water across my face. In the mirror, a tired woman stared back at me, her eyes rimmed with red, but her jaw set with something firmer. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. This version of me stripped down to nothing but resolve. Then I realized it was the woman I had been hiding all along, the one who had survived poverty, widowhood, storms, and loneliness. She was still here, waiting to be remembered. I sat back on the bed and opened my journal, the leather worn thin at the edges. My pen scratched across the page, words tumbling faster than I could control. I wrote about the shove, the slammed door, the message that severed us. I wrote about Sophie's laughter, Ben's hugs, the small joys that still tethered me to love. And then I wrote one sentence that seemed to settle in my bones. I will not let their cruelty define the rest of my life. The ink bled slightly on the paper, but the words felt carved into me. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the creak of the pipes and the occasional car rushing by outside. I lay back on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling's water stains shaped like forgotten maps. My shoulder throbbed, but the pain became a reminder, an anchor pulling me towards something stronger. They had cast me out, but in doing so, they had freed me. No more bending under the weight of their demands, no more mistaking sacrifice for love when it was really exploitation. As dawn crept in through the thin curtains, painting the walls with pale light, I sat up straighter. The motel room hadn't changed. It was still drab, still lonely, but I had. The despair of the night had settled into something steadier, a quiet fire that whispered, "You're not finished." I folded Michael's letter carefully, placed it back in my purse, and pressed my hand over it like a vow. That morning, when I stepped outside into the cool air, I felt the world differently. The grass sparkled faintly with dew, the birds sang as though nothing in the universe had shifted, and yet inside me, everything had. I was no longer a mother begging for a place at my son's table. I was a woman reclaiming her own. The morning after I left the motel, I walked into the bank with my shoulders squared and my purse clutched tight against my side. The building smelled of polished wood and paper, the kind of scent that always reminded me of permanence. My shoes clicked across the marble floor as I approached the desk, where a young teller greeted me with a smile too rehearsed to reach her eyes. I asked to see Miss Herrera, the loan officer who had helped me set up the mortgage years before, the one person I trusted inside these walls. She appeared a few minutes later, her dark hair pulled neatly into a bun, her expression calm but alert, as though she could already sense the heaviness I carried. "Diana," she said warmly, motioning me into her office. "It's been a while. Come in." Her office was small but orderly, with certificates framed on the wall and a single plant by the window. I sat across from her, my hands folded tightly in my lap. For a moment, I didn't know where to begin. Finally, I exhaled and said, "I need to cancel the auto payments on my son's mortgage." Effective immediately. Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't press right away. She pulled up the account on her computer, the keys clicking quickly beneath her fingers. "I'll need your signature to stop the transfers," she said. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "Yes," I said firmly, more sure than I've been about anything in a long time. My voice sounded steadier than I expected, and hearing it gave me strength. She slid a form across the desk, the paper crisp and waiting. As I signed my name, the weight of years seemed to shift. For so long, I had been the one keeping the foundation from cracking, covering every shortfall, smoothing every rough edge. Now, with one signature, I was stepping back, letting Ethan face the life he had chosen, without my safety net beneath him. Ms. Herrera studied me for a moment, then lowered her voice. "Diana, I don't mean to pry, but I think you should know. Your son has been using your name on other accounts, credit lines, cash advances." Her words struck me like a blow. I blinked at her, my fingers tightening on the pen. "What do you mean?" She turned the screen toward me, showing me lines of numbers and charges I didn't recognize. Furniture stores, luxury clothing, restaurants far beyond my budget. Each one carried my name at the top, my credit, my responsibility. My breath caught in my chest. I thought these were his accounts, I whispered, almost to myself. They were opened with your information, Ms. Herrera said gently. If you didn't authorize them, you may want to consider speaking with a lawyer. For now, I can flag them and make sure no new charges are processed without your consent. I felt the room tilt as though the air had thickened. All those years of trust, of believing Ethan's promises, had given him the tools to dig a hole under my feet. I thought of Clara's sharp smile, Nathan's careful words, and realized this had never been about family security. It had been about control. Please flag them, I said finally, forcing each word out, and send me copies of everything. Every statement, every signature. She nodded, already typing. I sat there, my hands trembling slightly, but inside me a new clarity began to take shape. For years I had been afraid to see the truth. Now the truth was staring me down in black ink and numbers that didn't lie. Ms. Herrera printed the cancellation confirmation for the mortgage payments and handed it to me. "This is official now," she said. "No more transfers will come from your account. If he wants to keep the house, he'll have to make the payments himself." I held the paper carefully, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. But these were not tears of sorrow alone. They carried something else, a release, a relief I hadn't allowed myself before. "Thank you," I whispered. She touched my hand briefly. "You're stronger than you think, Diana. Don't forget that." When I walked out of the bank, the autumn sun fell across my face. The air felt different, lighter, as if the very sky had shifted. I looked down at the papers in my hand and realized they were more than documents. They were a line drawn in the sand, a boundary I had finally set. Ethan might rage, Clara might scheme, Nathan might threaten, but I had taken back the first piece of my power. I tucked the papers into my purse, straightened my shoulders, and walked to my car. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was moving backward. Each step carried me forward, towards something I couldn't yet name, but knew I was ready to claim. 2 days after the bank, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Rachel Moore's voice came through the line, warm and steady, just as I remembered. She'd been a friend once, back when our children were still in elementary school and play dates filled our weekends. Life had carried us in different directions, but I knew she was now one of the best realtors in town. When she heard my voice, she gasped softly, "Diana." "My goodness, it's been too long. What can I do for you?" There was a pause before I answered, the words tasting strange on my tongue. "I want to sell the house," I said. "I need someone I can trust." Rachel didn't rush. She let the silence breathe before responding. "All right. Let's meet tomorrow morning. I'll bring the paperwork and we'll talk through your options. Diana, I promise you this. You won't go through it alone." Her words settled over me like a blanket. The next day, I met her at a cafe downtown. She looked almost the same, her blonde hair now streaked with silver, her eyes quick and compassionate. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt held. We sat across from each other, coffee steaming between us, and I told her the whole story, about Ethan, about Clara, about the night I was shoved out the door. Rachel listened without interrupting, her eyes steady on mine, her hand resting lightly over mine when my voice faltered. When I finished, she leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," she murmured, "but I've seen this before. Families tearing each other apart over property. It's always the ones who gave the most who end up paying the heaviest price. But Diana, you're stronger than they know. You're taking control, and that matters." She pulled a folder from her bag, laying out documents, market analyses, photographs of similar homes recently sold. The market's hot right now, she explained. Your house could bring in close to $480,000, maybe more depending on interest. But selling won't be simple if Ethan and Clara are still living there. Occupied listings are always harder. Buyers want a clean slate. I nodded slowly, her words sinking in. They won't leave willingly, I said quietly, not unless the ground shifts under their feet. Rachel studied me carefully, then gave a single nod. Then we'll make sure the ground does shift. But legally, you're the owner. Don't forget that hearing those words, owner, spoken with such clarity, stirred something fierce in me. For so long I had been made to feel like a guest in my own life, a burden in the home I paid for. But on paper, in truth, it was still mine. Rachel tapped the deed with her pen. This is your anchor. Whatever storms they stir, you have this. We spent hours going over the details. She explained staging, open houses, contingencies, things that felt both overwhelming and strangely empowering. I listened closely, taking notes, my hand cramping but refusing to stop. Every detail was a step forward, a rope pulling me out of the pit where I had been thrown. At one point, Rachel leaned in, her expression serious. Diana, I need to warn you. Once they realize you're serious about selling, they'll fight back. They'll make promises, maybe threats. They'll try to delay, to intimidate, but you must stand firm. This isn't just about a house. It's about your life, your freedom. Her words rang true, deep in my bones. I thought of Sophie and Ben, of how their parents might twist the story, telling them Grandma was the one tearing things apart. My chest ached, but I knew what Rachel said was right. To reclaim my dignity, I had to walk through the fire. By the time we signed the initial agreement, the sun had shifted high, pouring light through the cafe window. I looked down at the papers, my signature flowing across the page. This time it wasn't a surrender, it was a declaration. Rachel smiled, sliding the documents back into her folder. We'll start the listing process this week. I'll handle the details. You focus on staying strong. She squeezed my hand once more, her grip firm, grounding. When I left the cafe, the air smelled of roasted coffee and wet pavement. I walked slowly, my purse heavy with documents, my heart heavier still but steadier. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't simply reacting, I was choosing. I knew the road ahead would be messy, that Ethan and Clara wouldn't accept this without a fight. But I also knew something had shifted inside me. With Rachel at my side, with the truth in my hands, I was no longer the woman standing on a porch, begging for her place. I was the woman who held the keys, the woman who had decided that her silence would no longer mean surrender, but strength. I heard about it from a neighbor first, then from a friend who saw it on social media. Clara had hosted a little gathering at the house, not a grand event, but just enough to make her point. The photos showed her in the living room I had decorated years ago, the one with the floral curtains I had sewn myself, standing proudly with a glass of wine in her hand. Her friends flanked her on either side, smiling too brightly, their laughter caught in still frames. The caption beneath one picture read, "New chapter, new beginnings in our family home." The word struck me with a cruel irony. Family home, as if she had built it, as if the walls themselves had sprung from her ambition. I stared at the photos longer than I should have, memorizing every detail. The rug under their feet was the same one Michael and I had bought on sale our first year in the house. The bookshelf behind them still held the worn copy of Ethan's childhood Bible I had tucked there when he was 15. Every piece of that house carried my fingerprints, and yet Clara stood in the center of it all as though she were the rightful queen. I imagined the scene as if I had been there. Clara pouring wine into delicate glasses, Alice sitting nearby with a hesitant smile, trying to look supportive but never quite convincing. Nathan leaning back with that air of authority he wore like a second skin, perhaps even explaining to their guests how everything was now settled. And Ethan, my son, hovering at the edges, his arm looped around Clara's waist, his eyes gleaming with borrowed confidence. They must have felt triumphant, certain they had finally pushed me out for good. Clara, especially, must have believed she had won. I could almost hear her voice, dripping with pride, telling her friends, "The house is ours now. We don't have to worry anymore." To her, appearances were everything. If people saw her standing tall in that house, surrounded by guests and laughter, then the narrative was complete. She had claimed the prize, and I had been erased. What she didn't know was how fragile that illusion really was. Behind the photos and the laughter lay a mortgage with my name on it, a deed they could not alter without my consent, and a bank account no longer feeding their security. They lived in a castle built on sand, but Clara had always been skilled at convincing others the foundation was unshakable. I walked through the park that evening, phone still in my pocket, the images etched into my mind. The autumn air carried the scent of leaves beginning to rot, earthy and sharp, a reminder that even the brightest colors. Fade children played nearby, their laughter ringing like bells, and for a moment I thought of Sophie and Ben. Did they know what was happening? Did they sense the tension that hung between their parents and me like a storm cloud? I prayed they were shielded, at least for now. Sitting on a bench, I closed my eyes and let the noise of the park fade into memory. I saw Michael again, the way he used to sit in that very living room with a newspaper on his lap, pausing to smile at Ethan building towers of blocks on the floor. Those towers would topple, again and again, and Ethan would rebuild them with stubborn persistence. I had admired that spirit, believing it would carry him through life. I never imagined he would one day use it against me, building walls not to protect but to exclude. Clara's little victory parade only strengthened my resolve. If she needed to broadcast her triumph, it meant she feared it might not last. Real victories don't need audiences, they endure in silence. I folded my arms tightly across my chest, feeling the bruise still lingering on my shoulder, and whispered to myself, "Let her believe she's won." The truth will come. As the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, I rose from the bench with a steadier step. I thought of Rachel's words, of Ms. Herrera's quiet warning, of Donovan's watchful eyes across the street. I wasn't alone, no matter how Clara tried to paint me as defeated. I carried with me not just the strength of survival, but the certainty of truth. That night, back in my small motel room, I opened my journal again. I wrote about the photos, about the smug curve of Clara's smile, about the hollow echo of Ethan's compliance. But I ended the entry with a sentence that surprised me with its certainty. Her crown is made of glass. I underlined it twice, the ink pressing deep into the paper. And as I set the pen down, I realized something important. I no longer felt the sting of humiliation when I saw her posturing. I felt clarity. Clara could host as many gatherings as she wished, parade through the house in her finest clothes, and declare her victory to the world. But when the lights dimmed and the guests went home, the truth would still be there, waiting, patient and immovable. The house was not hers. My dignity was not hers to steal, and her celebration was nothing more than smoke, soon to vanish. It was late in the evening when my phone buzzed across the nightstand, the sound sharp against the stillness of the motel room. I glanced at the screen and saw Ethan's name. For a moment, I simply stared, my chest tightening. After days of silence, after the humiliation and the bruises, he was reaching out. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. "Mom, can we talk? I want to fix this. Clara and I will find a way to pay you back, little by little. Just don't sell the house." I read the words 3 times, searching for sincerity between the lines. Fix this, pay me back, little by little. It didn't sound like an apology. It sounded like bargaining, a desperate attempt to cling to something he feared losing. My hands shook, though whether from anger or sadness I couldn't tell. I closed my eyes, remembering the weight of Michael's letter in my purse, his steady warning not to give away my dignity. I typed back carefully, "Are you sorry for what you did to me, Ethan?" My thumb hovered before pressing send. The message went out, small and stark, like a stone dropped into deep water. Minutes stretched into an eternity before his reply arrived. We were stressed. Clara was upset. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but you're overreacting. Families fight. Let's not make this bigger than it is." The words hit me harder than the shove had. Not once did he say the words I longed to hear. "I'm sorry." Instead, he deflected, minimized, made me the problem for feeling wounded. Gaslighting, the counselors at school used to call it when children tried to twist blame back onto their teachers. Now I felt it in my own blood. I sat on the bed, the glow of the phone casting my reflection onto the dark window. My face looked older, lined with years of sacrifice, but in my eyes I saw something steady, something immovable. I typed one more message. "Ethan, I will not discuss this further until you can acknowledge the truth. Until then, don't contact me." And with a final swipe, I blocked his number. My hand trembled when I set the phone down, but my heart felt strangely calm. For years, I had trained myself to answer every call, to soothe every hurt, to patch every mistake. Blocking him felt unnatural, almost unthinkable, but also necessary. It was the first time I allowed myself to draw a line, to say enough. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan wobbling slowly above me, and let the silence settle. There were no more messages buzzing, no more rings shattering the night, only stillness. I thought of Sophie and Ben, their small arms clinging to me when I visited, their drawings crumpled in my purse. My heart ached knowing Clara would use them as pawns, telling them Grandma had walked away. But I reminded myself that children grow. That truth has a way of surfacing through years of lies. I reached for my journal again, my faithful companion through these dark weeks, and wrote, "Love without respect is not love. It is a cage." My pen scratched across the page, each word a release, a tether to something greater than the pain. I underlined it once, then closed the book. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it came without dreams of slammed doors or spilled suitcases. Instead, I dreamed of the house as it had been in its first days. Fresh paint on the walls, Michael hammering nails into the porch, Ethan running barefoot through the grass, laughing. For a fleeting moment in that dream, the world was whole again. And when I woke, I didn't cry. I simply sat in the morning light and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me what love is supposed to look like." Later that day, I walked to a small diner near the motel for breakfast. The waitress poured my coffee and asked if I wanted the special. I nodded, grateful for the simple normalcy of eggs and toast. As I ate, I noticed the families around me, parents cutting pancakes for children, couples arguing gently over the crossword. Life carried on, indifferent to my storm, and somehow that gave me strength. When I returned to my room, my phone sat silent, no longer a weapon waiting to strike. I tucked it into my bag, zipped it shut, and told myself this was a new chapter. Ethan had reached out, but not with what mattered, and until he did, I would not bend. I looked at Michael's photo again, the dirt wiped clean from its frame, and whispered, "I'm keeping my dignity. Just like you told me." The light through the thin curtains was soft, almost forgiving. For the first time, I felt that forgiveness belonged to me. That night, I placed my phone face down on the nightstand, determined to give myself one evening without the buzzing interruptions of regret. The motel room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional groan of pipes in the wall. I lay on the bed with my journal open, tracing over the words I had written earlier. Love without respect is not love. It is a cage. I read them again until they felt etched into my bones. Sleep began to drift over me, heavy but fragile, when the first vibration rattled across the wood beside me. I ignored it. A second came, then a third, each one pulling at the edges of my calm. By the fifth call, I turned the phone over and saw Ethan's name filling the screen. My hand twitched, but I didn't answer. I set it back down, closed my eyes, and listened to it ring until the silence returned. Minutes later, it began again, over and over, like waves crashing against a shore that refused to crumble. By midnight, the calls had multiplied, not only from Ethan, but from Clara, from numbers I didn't recognize. The log grew longer, each missed call stacking like bricks of desperation. 29 in all by the time dawn streaked pale light through the curtains. Each one carried the same message: panic. I sat up, rubbing my temples, staring at the screen. The last voicemail notification blinked, but I didn't press play. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, not when it had been used to push me out, to command me never to return. Instead, I scrolled through the messages that followed. Ethan: Mom, pick up. We need to talk, Clara. If you do this, you'll never see Sophie and Ben again. Another number I didn't recognize read, Call us back before it's too late. The words blurred together, a mix of anger and fear, bargaining and threats. I held the phone tightly, my fingers trembling. Clara's threat about the children pierced me deeper than anything else. The thought of Sophie's laughter fading from my life, of Ben's drawings never finding their way into my purse again, nearly broke me. But then I remembered the letter in my bag, Michael's steady voice reminding me not to give away my dignity. Love for my grandchildren did not mean surrendering to manipulation. I pressed the phone against my chest, closed my eyes, and breathed slowly until the panic settled. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been the one waiting by the phone, praying Ethan would call, praying he would need me. Now it was him who could not stop calling, his world cracking because the safety net he assumed would always be there had been cut away. The 29 missed calls were proof that my silence had power, that for once he was the one left outside the locked door, desperate for a way back in. I stood and drew the curtains open. The sun was climbing, painting the sky gold, indifferent to the storm in my life. I let the light spill over me, warming the bruises still fading on my shoulder, softening the ache in my chest. The phone buzzed again in my hand, another call I let roll into silence. I whispered into the empty room, "You cannot guilt me back into chains." The words surprised me, but they steadied me. I placed the phone on the windowsill and turned away, choosing instead to make coffee from the little machine on the counter. The bitter aroma filled the room, grounding me, reminding me that life could still hold simple rituals untouched by betrayal. As I sipped, I thought of Sophie and Ben, their small hands waving from the porch the last time I saw them. My heart ached, but I clung to the belief that truth has a way of surfacing, that one day they would understand who had truly loved them without condition. Clara could try to use them as pawns, but children grow, and memories root themselves deep. When the phone buzzed again, I didn't even look. 29 calls had been enough. They were not cries of love, but alarms of desperation, and I refused to be pulled into their fire. Instead, I picked up my journal and wrote, "Silence is not weakness. Silence is my strength." The words poured from me, each letter a shield, each sentence a reminder that I was no longer at their mercy. By the time the sun was fully up, the phone had gone quiet at last. I let the silence stretch, filling the room like a balm. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own story, and the weight of that realization settled into me like peace. The letter arrived just after noon, thick cream paper with my name typed in a stern black font. I stood at the motel desk, slid a finger under the flap, and read the first line twice. Notice of temporary restraining order. Clara and Nathan had gone to court to stop the sale. I called Rachel immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "Breathe," she said, as if she had already guessed. I read the notice aloud, hearing my voice tighten around the legal phrases. In the middle of the page was the pause they wanted. No listing, no transfer, no change of possession. A hearing was set for Friday morning. "They moved fast," Rachel said, steady as stone. "It's meant to scare you and to stall. It isn't the end." "Can they really block me?" I asked, staring at the stamped seal like it might leap from the paper. "They can slow you," she said. "They can't own what isn't theirs." A knock interrupted us. A process server stood at my door with another envelope. "Ms. Whitmore?" he asked. When I nodded, he handed it over and walked away. Inside was a declaration from Nathan, careful sentences about the children's welfare, about stability, about confusion allegedly caused by my decisions. He had signed his name with the swagger of a man who believed a pen could rearrange the truth. Anger rose hot, but under it, something steadier took root. I thought of the suitcase in the grass, the message telling me never to return, the account statements Ms. Herrera had shown me. If they wanted a courtroom, I would walk into it with my head high. I changed clothes, choosing a simple dark dress and sensible shoes. I clipped on the pearls Michael once gave me and looked in the mirror. I did not look broken. I looked anchored. At the courthouse, the hallway smelled of floor polish and old air. I checked in with the clerk and sat on a wooden bench with the notice folded in my lap. Minutes later, Clara and Nathan rounded the corner. Nathan wore a navy suit and a polite smile that hid teeth. Clara's heels clicked like small hammers on tile. She looked past me as if I were a coat rack and took a seat across the hall. She spoke first, a low voice meant for me and the corridor both. "This is unnecessary, Diana. If you had been reasonable, we wouldn't be here." I kept my eyes on the paper. "Reasonable," I said, "would have been not pushing a mother out of her home." Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We're protecting the children," he said. "They need continuity. Uprooting them now would be cruel. You mean losing access to a house you didn't buy would be inconvenient," I replied. "Continuity doesn't come from property. It comes from character A. Bailiff opened the courtroom door and called our case. Inside, the judge sat high behind the bench, spectacles low on his nose, eyes moving from face to face with the fatigue of a man who had heard every story. We stood. Their attorney spoke with polished arguments and references to codes I'd never read, painting me as impulsive, erratic, a retired woman making rash decisions that would harm her grandchildren. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stepped to the podium. My hands shook, but my words did not. I told him I was the only name on the deed, that the mortgage had been paid with my retirement, that I had been removed from the house by force and message. I described the bank records showing accounts opened in my name without consent. I did not raise my voice. I let the facts carry their own weight. He listened, scribbling occasionally, then sighed, balancing caution with principle. "Given the interests involved," he said, "I'm maintaining the temporary order until we can review evidence more thoroughly at a full hearing next week. No sale, no listing, no change of possession until then." He looked at me. "Ms. Whitmore, obtain counsel. Bring documentation. We will sort this out." The gavel's tap was small but final. The path forward tightened, the clock slowed. Outside the courtroom, Clara exhaled like a runner at the line, and Nathan's mouth curved in satisfaction. I felt the sting of setback, not defeat. The judge had not called me reckless. He had asked me to return with proof I could find. In the corridor, Clara turned, victory bright in her eyes. "You should stop," she said. "This is embarrassing." I met her gaze. "What's embarrassing," I replied, "is confusing cruelty for strength." Nathan touched her elbow and steered her away. "See you at the hearing," he said over his shoulder, like an invitation to a dinner party. I stepped into the afternoon light and called Rachel again. "They bought themselves time," I said. "Then we use it," she answered. Gather everything, emails, texts, bank statements. We'll be ready. I slipped the papers into my bag and squared my shoulders. They had forced a pause. They hadn't silenced the truth. The road had narrowed, but it still ran forward, and I would walk it one steady step at a time. On the courthouse steps, I opened the notice, tracing the date as if touching it could steady me. Friday, 9 a.m. I would not arrive empty-handed. That afternoon, I called a legal aid clinic and secured a consultation Monday, then walked to the copy shop to print every statement Ms. Herrera had promised. I asked for folders, labeled each one carefully, and slid the papers inside until the stack felt like armor. Mr. Donovan called early the next morning, his voice careful. He asked me to stop by his porch before noon. I walked 3 blocks with a folder, the hearing date circled. The screen door stood open. He waved me in with quiet courtesy. 2 mugs waited on the table. His phone lay face up beside a legal pad. He asked about my shoulder. I told him it would fade. He nodded, unlocked the phone, and swiped to a video. "I didn't want to intrude that night," he said, "but I thought you might need this." He tapped play. My front yard filled the screen, a grainy angle from across the street, porch light washing the grass in a pale halo. Ethan stepped into the frame, dragging my suitcase, and flung it down the steps so hard the wheel bent. I heard my voice, steady, asking him to stop. Then his voice, low and hard, telling me to leave, telling me not to come back. His hand closed on my arm. The camera did not blink. When the door slammed and the porch went dark, the video kept running long enough to catch me gathering my scattered clothes from the grass. I had survived that night, but seeing it through a lens turned the heat of memory into cold proof. Donovan paused, brought up the timestamp, and pointed. It matched the messages on my phone. "I backed it up to my computer and a thumb drive," he said. "I also wrote what I saw while it was fresh." He nudged the legal pad toward me. His handwriting, neat and deliberate, set down each step, each sentence, each gesture. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Why did you do this for me?" I asked. "Because I saw a good woman shoved out of her own doorway," he said, "and because truth dies easy when it stays private." He went inside and returned with a small tin. In it were 2 identical flash drives, each labeled with the date, time, and our street name. He placed them on the table like offerings. "One for the court," he said. "One for you. I'll keep a master and a cloud backup. If anyone thinks they can make it vanish, they'll be wrong." We watched the clip again, slowing it to capture still frames where my shoulder hit the wall and where Ethan's hand gripped the suitcase handle. Donovan sent me the file through an encrypted app his grandson had installed, smiling at the small bit of modernity. "Kid thinks I'm a spy now," he joked, and for a moment, we both laughed. When the laughter faded, we talked about testimony. He offered to appear at the hearing and swear to what he had seen. He had already looked up the process for a notarized statement and suggested we go that afternoon. It struck me how long it had been since someone made a plan with me that did not involve my surrender. At the notary's office, the clerk checked his identification, watched him sign, and pressed the seal with a firm click. We walked out with copies folded into a manila envelope. The day felt brighter, not because the sun had changed, but because the facts had put on boots. Back on his porch, Donovan asked a question. "Do you want me to talk to the kids if I see them?" Just to tell them their grandmother loves them, the request undid me. I swallowed and said yes, without adding heat to what was already a tender wound. Before I left, I looked him in the eye and said the words that had climbed my throat since he hit play. "You gave me back my voice." He shook his head. "No, Diana. You never lost it. You just needed a microphone. I carried the envelope like a lantern." In the motel room, I laid everything on the bed. The drives, the affidavit, screenshots of Ethan's message, the bank statements Ms. Herrera had sent, the order setting the hearing date. The pile looked like a small city built on paper. I labeled folders and stacked them by relevance, the way I prepared lesson plans. I knew what I would carry into the courtroom. Not rage, not pleading. Evidence. That night, I brewed tea, turned off the television, and replayed the video not to punish myself, but to rehearse the truth. When the image of me gathering clothes from the grass filled the screen, I did not look away. I thought of the girl in a drafty apartment and the woman I had become. I thought of Michael and his letter. I thought of Sophie and Ben. I whispered, I am not afraid to be seen. I woke before dawn. I dressed, folded the affidavit into my bag, and slipped the flash drive into a small pocket. As I zipped it, calm settled over me. I poured the last of the motel coffee into a paper cup and decided it would do. By the time traffic rose, I was ready. The file was complete, the witness steady, the story clear. I did not rehearse apologies on the drive. I rehearsed the facts, each one fitting into place like a stone. If they wanted a courtroom, I would meet them there with mercy in my voice and evidence in my hands. Justice can be quiet and still win. The courtroom felt colder than the hallway, a hush held in by oak walls and the steady tick of a clock I could not see. I took my seat at the petitioner's table and squared my folder. Judge Collins entered. We stood, we sat. He called the case, and Nathan's attorney rose with a polished smile. I had no lawyer yet, only the file I had built and the steadiness I had learned the hard way. The attorney spoke of stability and routine, of how a sale would uproot children and punish a stressed family. He said I was reacting, not reasoning, that I had once planned to transfer the house, and that the court should keep the order in place while they pursued a permanent solution. He gestured toward Clara and Ethan like a salesman pointing at a display. When my turn came, I held the podium with both hands. Your Honor, I said, my name is Diana Whitmore. I am the only person on the deed. I paid the mortgage with my retirement. I was put out of the doorway and told by text not to return. I canceled the auto pay. Since then, I have learned of credit lines opened in my name. Without consent, I let the facts sit in the air. Do you have evidence? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. I lifted folders one by one. Exhibit A, printed screenshots of the texts. Exhibit B, records from Ms. Herrera confirming cancellation and identifying accounts opened with my information. I held up a flash drive. Exhibit C, a video recorded by my neighbor, Mr. Donovan, from across the street. Play it, he said. The lights dimmed. On the monitor, my porch glowed under the yellow bulb. Ethan dragged my suitcase and threw it down the steps. The wheels skittered. I entered the frame. My shoulder hit the jamb. My voice asked for calm. His voice told me to leave and never return. The door slammed. The empty porch held the sound like a bowl. No one spoke while the clip ended. The attorney cleared his throat. Unfortunate, he said, but it does not change the legal reality. The property functions as my client's family home. Mrs. Whitmore has previously indicated she intended to transfer title. He handed up a page. A letter from last spring, bearing her signature. The judge studied the paper, then looked at me. Is this your signature, Mrs. Whitmore? No, Your Honor. Explain. I write my W with a double stroke. This loop is single. The notary's stamp date predates the letter. The named notary resigned and moved abroad months earlier. I have confirmation from bank compliance I offered another folder. Exhibit. He read the email, examined the stamp, and turned to counsel. The attorney's confidence thinned. We retrieved it from family files, he said. My clients believed it authentic. Clara flushed. Ethan stared at the table. Mr. Donovan, the judge said. Are you present? Donovan stood. Yes, Your Honor. You recorded Exhibit C. I did. Is it a true and accurate depiction of that evening? It is. Thank you. You may sit. The judge polished his glasses with a square of cloth, then replaced them with care. Here is the ruling, he said. The temporary restraint is modified. Mrs. Whitmore may list the property and begin pre-sale procedures. There will be no change of possession without further order. A full evidentiary hearing will address the alleged letter and the unauthorized accounts. Counsel will produce the original document for inspection and arrange for testimony from the notary or custodian. If any exists, the parties will exchange materials promptly. The attorney began to object. Judge Collins raised a hand. Stability for Children does not license adults to expel an owner or to fabricate consent, he said evenly. I expect civility. I expect compliance. He also directed counsel to preserve all devices and communications related to the letter, including drafts, emails, and metadata, and invited me to file an identity theft report so subpoenas could issue. His pen tapped twice, a metronome that turned caution into forward motion for the record and remedies. He set a date 2 weeks out and looked at me again. Mrs. Whitmore, obtain counsel. You presented clearly today. Bring what you have, and the court will sort what belongs to whom. His voice softened a fraction. And please see a doctor about that shoulder. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. In the hallway, the building felt warmer, as if a vent had opened. Rachel squeezed my arm. He heard you, she whispered. By the elevators, Clara held herself rigid, earrings trembling. Nathan spoke into his phone. Ethan would not meet my eye. I walked past without stopping, the flash drive in my pocket like a small coin of iron. Outside, the sky was a bright, forgiving blue. I sat on the low wall and let the traffic hum quiet my pulse. I texted Rachel a thank you, emailed Ms. Herrera requesting certified copies, and phoned the legal clinic to confirm Monday's appointment. My voice did not shake. A path took shape. Evidence. First, patience second, dignity always. On the drive back, I passed the playground on Maple. Children arced on the swings, sneakers flashing in the sun. I pictured Sophie and Ben tumbling through that light and made a promise I did not need to say aloud. I would fight without cruelty, stand without shouting, and never trade their trust for a victory that would sour in my hands. Love can be firm without being loud. Truth can be quiet and still prevail. I gripped the wheel and drove on, the day opening like a long, clear road. Alice found me first. I was standing across the street from the house, pretending to read a bus schedule while counting my breaths. The light slanted through the maple leaves and sparked on the porch rail. When the door opened and Alice stepped out with an armful of laundry, I thought she would turn back inside. Instead, she paused, shaded her eyes, and crossed the lawn toward me. I won't step on the porch, I said before she spoke. I only needed to see the place and remember I can look without falling apart. Her expression steadied into a tired kindness. They took the kids for ice cream, she said quietly. They'll be back in 10. If you want a minute, I can make that happen. We waited together by the curb. When the car turned onto the street, she touched my sleeve. Walk with me, she murmured, and we moved to the gate. Sophie saw me first. Her face flared into a look I will carry to my last day. She shoved at her seatbelt, tumbled from the car before Clara finished speaking, and ran. Ben barreled after her, his shoelace whipping. I bent and they collided with me so hard my balance rocked. I did not fall. I held. Grandma, are you mad at us? Ben asked into my sweater. Never, I said. Not 1 second. Sophie studied my face with the seriousness of a 10-year-old who has learned too early to read adult weather. Are you leaving again today? I am, I answered, but I'm not leaving you. Clara slammed her door. Ethan came around the back of the car, eyes on the ground. Alice stood on the bottom step and said evenly, I'll bring them in when they've said hello. I turned back to the children. I can't stay. But I wanted you to know the most important thing. My love for you does not depend on where I'm allowed to stand. Sophie's chin trembled, then stilled. Mom says you started a mess. I started telling the truth, I said gently. Grown-ups sometimes confuse those. Ben tugged a small notebook from his pocket. Inside, he had drawn a boat. A stick figure stood at the wheel and another slept below. "I made this," he said. "You can keep it." I saw another boat in memory, a candle-lit fort, a little boy counting between thunder and lightning. My throat closed, then cleared. "I will keep it safe," I said. Alice checked the street. "We don't have long," she murmured. "I will take the blame if I must." Sophie dug into her pocket and produced a folded note. "I wasn't supposed to bring it," she whispered, "but I wanted you to have it." In neat loops, she had written that she missed our library Saturdays and the way I made pancakes into shapes. She asked if I could come to her chorus concert if I sat in the back and wore my blue sweater. I kissed her hair and said I would try. Ben had printed on the next page in wandering blocks, "Please come in." He had drawn a key with rays around it. I tucked both notes inside my journal beside Michael's letter. Clara spoke again, clipped to the bone. "That's enough." Inside, Alice did not move. "Another minute," she said. "Let them say goodbye without choosing a side." Ethan finally looked up. For a heartbeat, his mouth faltered, then set. "Go on, kids," he said. I knelt so my face met theirs. "Here is what I want you to remember," I said. "When someone tells you a story about the people you love, keep a small room inside you where you save your own." Sophie nodded. Ben pressed his nose to mine and exhaled a laugh he didn't know he had. I kissed them both. "Be kind to each other," I whispered. "Do your homework. Water the fern in the kitchen. It gets thirsty when people argue they promised." Clara took a step forward. Alice stepped sideways, a small movement that made space for us to finish. I squeezed her hand as I rose. "Thank you," I said. She looked away, blinking. "I'm late for regretting," she murmured. I backed toward the gate. At the threshold, I turned. Sophie and Ben stood in the doorway with their fingers pressed to their lips in a shared sign. I placed my finger to mine and smiled. The porch boards creaked like an old friend stretching after sleep. On the sidewalk, I let my posture grow tall. Clara herded the children inside. Ethan remained on the lawn for a moment, half-turned, like a man listening for weather he cannot name. Then he went in and the door closed. Final. At the bus stop, I unfolded the notes and memorized the shape of each letter. I slipped them away, straightened my shoulders, and counted the slow breaths that carry a person forward. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard, sat by the window, and let the town slide past. I thought of folders filled with proof, of court dates and steady voices, of a woman who would not trade her dignity for access. I was leaving without their hands in mine, but not without hope. Love had written itself down. An ally had opened a door. The evening ahead looked. I rode toward it, holding what mattered. The closing papers were signed on a Thursday morning. Rachel slid the last sheet across the table, and I traced my name carefully, each letter steady, as though I were writing not just a signature, but a final chapter. The house sold for $480,000, just as she had predicted. Enough to clear every lingering debt, enough to give me the freedom I had thought was long gone. When the wire confirmation came through, I held the receipt like a key I had forged myself. For once, no one else had touched it. I walked outside into the autumn air, my hair lifting in the breeze, and felt years loosen around my shoulders. The house that had once bound me was no longer theirs to claim or mine to mourn. It had become what it always should have been, a choice. My choice. With a portion of the money, I repaired the roof of the small cottage Michael and I had bought decades earlier, the one tucked at the edge of town, quiet and unassuming. Its shingles had curled, its porch leaned, and its garden lay untended, but it still held the bones of home. I hired a crew to set it straight, watching them work from a chair by the maple tree. Each hammer strike echoed like punctuation, closing the sentence of sorrow and starting another of strength. When the roof was finished, I moved back in. The walls smelled faintly of cedar and old memories. I set Michael's photograph on the mantel and lit a candle beside it. "We made it," I whispered. The flame flickered in reply. Life settled into rhythms I hadn't known in years. Morning coffee by the window, afternoons spent mending the small garden, evenings with my journal. I no longer jumped at every buzz of my phone. Ethan still called, numbers piling on blocked lists, but I didn't flinch when they appeared. Silence had become my ally. One afternoon, as I shelved books in the study, I found the old cedar box where I kept letters and photographs. I added Sophie's note about pancakes and Ben's drawing of the boat, sliding them alongside Michael's letter. A family of paper bound not by law or manipulation, but by love that could not be erased. I knew I might not see them soon, but their words would live in my keeping. One day they would be old enough to find me themselves, to ask their own questions, and when that day came, I would be ready with the truth. Neighbors began to notice my return. Mr. Donovan stopped by with fresh apples, placing them in a bowl on my counter. "Place looks alive again," he said with a smile. Ms. Herrera mailed me a copy of the cleared accounts, a simple line that read, "Zero balance." Rachel visited one Sunday with muffins, insisting I had given her more strength than she had given me. These small kindnesses stitched into something larger, a reminder that community doesn't vanish when families fracture. At night, I sat on the porch with a blanket, watching the stars drift over the dark fields. I thought about justice. Not loud, not flashy, but slow and patient, like the growth of roots beneath the soil. Ethan and Clara had fought to strip me of dignity. In the end, they lost not only the house, but the illusion of control. My silence had spoken louder than their shouting ever could. In my journal, I wrote a final entry about the journey. The strongest revenge is silence and dignity. I pressed the pen down firmly, sealing the words into the page. They weren't meant as a battle cry. They were a reminder, a compass for the rest of my days. One morning, I opened the windows and let fresh air sweep through the cottage. The curtains lifted, carrying the scent of earth and rain. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the light spilling over the rim of my cup, and felt a calm I hadn't known since before Michael's death. The house no longer echoed with betrayal, but hummed with rebirth. I wasn't the woman begging for a place at her own table anymore. I was the woman who had set a new table, in her own space, with her own name written on every page of her life. My story had bent, but it hadn't broken. It had become something steadier, stronger, something worth living. And so I breathed in deeply, folded my hands around the warm cup, and smiled into the quiet. Whatever storms lay ahead, I knew I could meet them with silence, with dignity, with a heart that had learned at last that home is not given by others. It is claimed within.